Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Tonight's episode brought to you by Roll20. Check them out, the largest virtual tabletop online at roll20.net. We are on social media. Check us out, SWGM Podcast, on Facebook and Twitter. Stop by the YouTube channel, like, subscribe, share, youtube.com/SWGM Podcast. And we're on iTunes as well. Like, subscribe, comment, iTunes.com/Savage Worlds GM Podcast. If you like what we do, check us out on Patreon. Throw us a buck, support the show. And if you happen to be watching the live stream, feel free to participate in the chat. We do bring those live into the game, into the show. Tonight's topic: peacemongering. What would your campaign be like if it was populated by more non-combat characters? And here to describe it, Dustin the Savage Zealot Smith.
We're coming. We're coming. Okay, now we're going.
Dave, the rules maven Scott.
Do you want Green Goblin? Because that's how you get Green Goblin.
And Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
Namaste.
Hashtag goat yoga. All right, so let's talk about...
It's so peaceful having a goat climb all over you.
All right. Settle down.
Is that a hot yoga technique or a normal yoga technique?
Well, they don't call it downward facing dog. They call it downward facing gruff.
I don't know. I guess it's how much the goat excites you, if it's hot or regular.
Guys, this is so bad.
So what were we going to talk about tonight? Goats?
Yeah, I guess we're going to talk about goats. How to get more goats into your campaign, because everybody loves a goat. Especially if you name it Billy the Kid.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
Okay.
No, let's actually talk about pacifist, playing pacifist in Savage Worlds. It seems counterintuitive, really, because if you look at Savage Worlds, anybody that's played it for a while, the main thrust of the book happens to be about combat. Combat's fast, furious. You can all kinds of mechanics for soaking.
Throw tons of mooks at people.
Yeah, I'll just plow through people. However, the game is just as balanced in non-combat. The ability to persuade, intimidate, taunt, having actual social combat mechanics, as well as edges that boost up your ability to persuade people to doing things. Social conflict rules to allow that to happen and take place. So let's talk about...
Apart from a few very specific systems, the amount of the rulebook that's associated with combat in every RPG, and again, there's a handful of exceptions to this rule, the thrust of most of them, where I'm going to say 75% of most core systems, are all combat. The fact that Savage Worlds, in just a few very specific mechanics, does the entire other half of the game in very few rules, leaves so much space for that role play to happen at your table, because now you're not trying to figure out, okay, well, when do we need to roll the dice? At what point do we break the role play to have the dice roll? All the games have, your social skills in them, but in most cases, you find out that players never use those because it just never makes sense where the break point is. When do I need to make the coercion roll? When do I need to make the streetwise roll? Savage Worlds makes it very kind of cut and dry, and even has some rules in there for things like the social conflict, where it specifically says you get this kind of a bonus on it based on how good your role play was. There's even that suggestion that the player should get rewarded for good role play with a bonus on those rolls. So I think it's the whole Savage Worlds thing of, it's not that it's simple, it's very elegant. It does a lot with very few rules.
Elegantly simple. That's what I tell people.
It was from a previous era.
Yeah, and I think Dave's kind of right with a lot of the RPG.
Hold on a
books.
second.
And
Hold on a second. Sorry. Dustin, did you just make a fucking lightsaber pun?
Yes.
Fuck. All right, go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
Its work here is done.
Yeah. All right. But yeah, I think a lot of people too, when they get a new book, We won't say everyone because I'm not going to put that blanket statement. But I know a lot of people, myself included, a lot of times in a new role-play system, what's the first thing I want to know? How's combat work?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I see a lot of, I think there's a lot of that people, that's one of the first things is how's combat work in this new system?
Well, it's the go-to in our hobby too.
Well,
let's be fair, in our hobby, it's the go-to.
It is
resolution mechanic.
It is
it's
very
the
much
default.
so.
It's the default way to resolve a conflict.
Default way to resolve a conflict in the hobby, but the other side of that is that most of the players in the hobby are so fed up with poor rules in the past that they don't bother with rules for the social side of the game. That's all handled through this hand-wavy, your character is just as eloquent as you are at the table, or just as eloquent as you are at the table. You know, that you don't have to make any dice rolls or invest any skill points or anything to have your character be eloquent or a good actor outside of combat, because we don't like those rules in other systems. So they haven't really looked at the ones in Savage Worlds.
Yeah. Well, the thing too about Savage Worlds too, Dave mentioned the a +2 for a brilliant argument, or substituting knowledge if you're talking about a certain topic that comes up in that debate, and using a knowledge skill, a knowledge roll instead of persuasion. The other thing too is the book will tell you, you get caught in a lie in your role play, -2 to that persuasion roll. So I mean, it's balanced on both sides of that equation as well. I think the other thing too, like Dave said, is a lot of the historical role play, because there weren't social mechanics in the game like there were for combat mechanics. Yeah, you get a lot of hand waving. So the guy who's it all falls back to, well, role play out what you say. Well, wait a minute, I'm not role playing out swinging a sword at somebody, and I got dice and mechanics and stats for that. Why don't I have that for the social side of things?
And to be fair, Dave Martell in chat actually touches on this a little bit. He says he thinks the combat focus in tabletop RPGs comes from the fact that our hobby descended from wargaming, and I think that's entirely true. You know, it used to 100% of the rules was the combat resolution, and everything else was stuff that the players were adding on their own to what was meant to just be a miniatures war game. We were adding these stories around what happened in the miniature war that we were running. And over time, the RPG genre has grown out of that to be a separate type of game. But unfortunately, that over-reliance on just, we'll tack it on after the combat has just kind of carried over.
Right. Well, and to quote Happy Jack's RPG podcast, one of their clever tongue-in-cheek sayings with T-shirt prints of, "Hey, stop talking to my XP." Mm-hmm. This is a combat game. Why are you talking? Why are you role playing? That's not what we're here to do. I got dice and I got to kill that thing for XP and stats. Get out of the way.
Why do you think I have an owlbear farm? XP, baby.
Well, interestingly enough, I saw a post on the Facebook page earlier today where they were discussing this idea of this tracking search that they were going to do, where the party of adventurers was trying to track somebody down, and they were going to do it over the course of a dramatic task, so that they could have this awesome narration around what is essentially your characters trying to chase someone down in a maze. And it's entirely not combat, but it's another example of where there are rules in this system that let you do something. There's no rule for that, but there's a dramatic task that lets you facilitate it. And I think that's a great way to look at how you can handle the non-combat, resolution to things. Is a dramatic task works really well for a football game. A bunch of ETU players are all playing the members of the football squad. Well, how do you get them through a night where the big story is the homecoming football game? A dramatic task is a great opportunity to let those players all take actions. None of it's combat, and all of it is focused on telling the story of a football game. Mm-hmm. You don't need to run that as a mock combat with damage rolls to see how many yards they get and stuff like that I've seen people talk about. No, run it as a dramatic task and let the narrative shine through.
Well, and I think here's the thing too. So let's take a simple thing from Savage Worlds. If I hit you with enough damage to meet your toughness but not go 4 over and cause a wound, you're shaken. Well, what if I hit you with a wicked taunt and a wicked burn? I could get the same result by making a taunt roll as I can by making a fighting roll, just as easily. And it has the same mechanical effect in combat. So I don't even have to pick up a sword. I could be the guy sitting in a bar in the middle of a bar fight, and my entire round is, you stink. Your mother hits harder than you do. And then people having to make a spirit roll against that or a smarts roll against that not to be shaken.
I one time I actually
camp?
was at band camp. Yes, the
What's
flutes.
a band camp?
I actually was I challenged an NPC. My character challenged an NPC that was like this tank, this gigantic +4 size, just brawler. He was gonna walk all over the party. And like, so we prepped for that. And my character, who was a distiller, that meant he made liquor, tricked the brawler into getting into a drinking contest with us. And we turned it into a dramatic task, which was opposed vigor rolls. And by the end of it, like, I was role-playing just being incredibly drunk. Like, and I did like this whole like wave over of, you know, you should join us. You should be a hero. Then you can help us. And he failed the dramatic task, so he was like, yeah, that's a great idea. So he literally led the party right to the secret hideout.
Right. No combat needed to happen to have that happen.
Right. Just because, like, you have to think. Like, have you ever seen Beverly Hills Cop?
Oh yeah.
Hasn't.
Yeah, the original.
Nope.
There's an entire generation that has not seen Beverly Hills Cop. So if you say Axel Foley, they have no idea what you're talking about. But
they think he's the guy who was the lead singer for Guns N' Roses,
right? But Axel Foley, if you go back and watch the first two, the third one is really just an action film. But if you go back and watch the first two, that's what he does. Is he starts talking, and then he says something so completely ridiculous that the person buys it, because there's no way he could be making it up.
Well, that's just a strong charisma roll, right? Against
Right.
Yeah.
I think there's an aside to make that while the dramatic tasks and the social conflicts are great kind of secondary options for resolution, that there's an entire slew of things you can do in combat as a pacifist character.
Right.
We're not just limited to a taunt, but you've got every version of a test of will and every version of a trick, both of which are phenomenally powerful ways to affect the outcome of combat. And especially with the changes we saw in Flash Gordon and rumored to be in the upcoming release of Black, I mean, you can now do that with damn near any skill or trait. That gives you a lot of leverage to go, well, my character is just going to baffle them with bullshit as a smarts trick, or my character is just going to, come out of nowhere preaching the word of heaven as a trick to get them all to turn their backs on my friends. We're going to clobber them over the head. That's just the purely pacifist character has a lot of options, even in combat.
Right, and I would say too, the magical pacifist is even more powerful. Really, boost lower trait. Oh my god, is powerful power in Savage Worlds, especially if you do it against enemies in vigor, reforming their toughness. Slumber. Here, I'm just gonna sleep.
Yeah. You can hit somebody. You can hit a whole group with slumber, and if you've got a high enough stealth and a dagger, you can take out the entire group.
Well, yeah, but we're talking about pacifists who don't kill. But yeah, Yeah, maybe somebody was a pacifist and just snapped. Okay.
They kill quietly. This is the most peaceful murder ever.
Hey, I had a player once who made sure every single game she played in, her character always started with zip ties.
Mm-hmm. That's a great way of restraint.
I think, though, players, when they pick pacifist, they have these grand ideals in their head and grand ideas of their character. But I always find that those people, they seem to have a very, very hard time playing that character because of they can't beat it up and they can't kill it and take its stuff. You know, one of the funny things is when we had the characters, the pre-gens for the modules that became Buccaneer, that's Buccaneer Through Hell and High Water, available on RPG now. One of them was a pacifist, and nobody would ever play it. He would always sit on the table. As soon as we did another iteration of the characters, we took pacifist off of him. The next convention, he got played.
Yep.
So I think, one, there is absolutely something about seeing pacifist on a character sheet that can act as a deterrent to people who don't want that experience. That is absolutely a thing, and I think people need to realize the difference between the pacifist minor and the pacifist major hindrance, because it is a really big difference. With that said, secondarily, I have also seen the other end be true, and that is that they take pacifist and then they play this ridiculous, over-the-top version of it that they're almost to the point of beating up the trope of pacifism. Like, you know, they play the character who is in the corner retching at the sight of blood, and it is constantly admonishing the party for taking the life of the goblin that was about to slit that character's throat. You know, you can play pacifist in such a wide range of ways that it's funny to me. You always see either the I'm absolutely avoiding it because I don't want to do that, and the I'm going to take this to the nth extreme and not play with any of the ground in the middle. Like, I played a pacifist character for a while in one of Jared's games where the character was pacifist and bloodthirsty at the same time. And that was such a fun character because he was constantly trying to find a non-combat resolution to every encounter we came up against, unless it involved the thing which he was bloodthirsty for, in which he just absolutely lost his shit and dove headlong into combat that he was not statted out for. I just want to point this out. He would grab a kitchen knife and attack a werewolf with no armor, no magical properties, and he's only about as good a fighter as my 7-year-old. But he would do it with gusto.
And I think there's this concept that pacifists never raise their fists. They never do anything. I like the idea. I like this kind of pacifist character. Oh, I'm a prize fighter. I killed a man in the ring. I don't fight people anymore. I'll fight in self-defense, maybe, but I've got too much guilt around it. No. I killed a man with my bare hands, and I won't raise him in anger again. And then, of course, you know that character is going to be put in a spot where he's going to have to raise them in anger again. And then it's up to the player and the player character to embrace that as part of the role play. Like, oh my God, no, I won't do it. I won't go to town. You could also say Batman's a pacifist, right? He doesn't really kill anybody, only fights by non-lethal means, won't use guns.
So
I don't believe
on the surface, Batman is the classic pacifist minor. He doesn't kill. He doesn't allow captives to be killed. He won't kill himself. But then if you actually watch Batman's actions, he's breaking necks. He's throwing razor blades at people's heads. He ran over a guy's head with his car as an interrogation technique. Batman is not a pacifist in action, only in
theory.
Batman is a sadist because he wants you to continue living so he can beat you up again.
And again and again.
He wants to break every bone in your body, and you would die before he got through all of the bones. That's Batman's mentality. You killed my parents.
He's absolutely, like, if you look at the Batman ethos, the way it's presented, that character is a pacifist miner. He doesn't kill. He absolutely will fight, but he's a pacifist miner. Now, take that to, a more extreme, and you've got, Mabel's character in our current Dead End game, who most of you may or may not have seen the episode she was on the show for, but she actually reaches over and grabs another player's gun in the middle of their attack action and throws their aim off, which Jared ended up giving them a pretty nasty range penalty for, someone trying to take their gun away, because to her it was wrong for them to shoot another living human being. Right. It's a zombie game, and she was completely okay if it was a zombie, but if it's not a zombie, she's going to stop you from hurting other people. So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can play with that and take it in these different manners that don't include the whole I'm standing in the corner talking about how we don't enter combat so that you're a detriment to the party.
I think that
also that you don't do anything the entire time.
That's because people don't understand the concept, the principle of pacifism. It's you have, like Jared, you were talking about the boxer who killed somebody. The principle of it is the consequences of using the raw power that you have is you could kill somebody. That boxer, that pacifist who's racked with guilt is not weak. Do not confuse pacifism with weakness. A pacifist is somebody who knows what happens when he opens up, like Batman. Dave, going back to Batman, like there's a couple of comics where he actually crosses the line and kills the Joker, and then he just kills everybody. Like,
yeah, it sends him over the edge because he's violated his core tenet, and once he's broke that rule, he has nothing holding him back. But Chris makes a very interesting point in the player who just sits there doing nothing because they have pacifists on the character sheet. That is the one that I hate the most, because that player's not having fun. Their encounter is not being able to do anything.
Yeah, because you talk to them, and then they're like, "Well, I'm a pacifist, so I can't do anything." Well, you haven't taken the time or the effort to look at the system and look at Savage Worlds and say, "Hey, what can I do?" And that's how we opened the show. We talked about all the things you can do with, and like you said, with the Flash Gordon rules, if those end up being moved over, as a pacifist, you should be able to do something every round.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you're going to have to be a little more. You may have to be a little more creative, and than the person who's just going to go, shoot it, bash it with the sword, because you're trying to avoid that part. So you may have to think outside the box a little bit, but you can do things. Don't use that as a crutch, and because you're not going to have any fun role playing. And then it's going to come across to the rest of the table, and it's going to come across to the GM, and you'll say, "Well, I'm a pacifist, so I can't. That's why I have to do this."
Well, or you can build the character in such a way where your main gig in the party is the driver. You take a non-combat, non-offensive kind of role for the group if you want to. It's your classic. I hate to say it, but it's your classic cleric healer priest. Right? Oh, I'm the pacifist character, so I'm the one buffing everybody, and I'm the one healing everybody. Oh, blah, 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 boring. You don't have to play it that way. I mean, you could be the priest who's like, "Oh, sure, I'll heal you. What have you done for me lately?"
Right.
"Oh, I get my powers from the God of justice. What you're doing is unjust. I'm not healing you."
Another guy I played a priest of self-flagellation, and he carried around a flail, which he hit everyone he healed with. That was his holy implement. If you were getting healed, you were taking 2 or 3 points of damage at the end of his flail as he cast the power, because that was the trapping behind how he delivered his healing. Is he flagellated you. He came around and punished the injury and the sin out of your body, and healed you through the power of his god. That was such an amazing character to watch him play, because he played the character as a just absolute sadist. He enjoyed causing the pain that everyone should suffer because of their iniquity on other characters. The meanest, nastiest character in the world. Pacifist minor.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, obviously, it takes a brutal hand to literally beat the hell out of some heretics.
Well, and you could also, and here's the thing too: the Savage Worlds rules set for the description of it will tell you that, hey, maybe if you're just a major pacifist, you won't do anything but fight with your fist. It doesn't have to mean you don't fight because you have the hindrance. I mean, it doesn't have to mean that. It just means that you don't rely on combat to solve problems.
Yeah.
Really, if you're going to play a kind of pacifist character in a very loose sense of the word, you look for other ways to solve problems instead of just pull out a gun and shoot it.
Yeah. And even if you are dedicated to it being a combat solution from a pacifist character, Savage Worlds is another, one of the other things it has going for it is you can very easily make non-lethal weapons in this game. There's a lot of examples of stun guns and tasers and several different licensee products. There's a lot of like truncheon style, non-lethal, bludgeoning weapons in different settings. I mean, it's been done before, folks. There's stats out there for all kinds of non-lethal stuff, including the man trap.
Called shot to the head, jaw, non-lethal. Karate chop the jaw.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to cost a lot because that's a hard one to make, but you knock them out. Dave Martell.
Deadlands wild attack.
Yeah.
Dave Martell brings up the Deadlands Noir knockout blow, but if you actually look at that, it's supposed to be an attack they don't see coming.
Yeah.
This is not... You can't say, I'm going to do a called shot knockout blow and just pistol whip them in the face in the middle of combat. That's not how that works under the way it's written in that book. Now, your GM might absolutely rule that he's playing in a game where that's what he wants you guys to do, is you're constantly trying to deal these knockout blows rather than dealing with taking non-lethal damage up to incapacitation and just being knocked out. Because here's the other thing about non-lethal. You still have to heal that. It doesn't just magically go away because it's the words non-lethal in front of it. It's still a wound. It still has to go through the normal healing process.
Yep. So let me ask this question. So how do you guys see it as far as does having a pacifist, someone who wants to play a pacifist, and I mean like a hardcore pacifist, no, it's wrong. Violence is wrong. I'm a hot fucking Magandhi in this game, and no, I don't. Nope, I don't know. Do you have to? Does it cause inter-party conflict?
Yes.
Does it ruin other people's fun?
I think it can. I really think it can, because if you have that person who consistently, let's say he's playing some kind of a non-combat type monk in a fantasy setting, and you're fighting a bunch of orcs, and he's constantly, well, we can't fight them, we can't kill anything, blah, 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 blah. Everybody else at the table is going to be like, dude, come on.
So I think this is a session 0 conversation to have when that character idea gets pitched. And this is a discussion that goes back to an argument that I was part of in the in one of the either the G Plus or the Facebook page here a week or so ago, which is about the style of play that someone brings to the table. As a GM, you are well within your right to say, no, that character doesn't fit this game, or no, you broke some rules to do that, or whatever the case is. You have that right as a GM, and I think that's a session 0 conversation, is someone comes to the table with the Mahatma Gandhi character, and the premise you pitched is you're playing through the first Expendables movie. No, the character just doesn't fit. That doesn't mean that it's a bad character. It just may not fit the party cohesion and things that you have going forward. That said, it could also be a very interesting character to introduce into that story, depending on how the players are going to take the conflict, because that's the key thing. Is it going to cause inter-party conflict between the characters, or inter-party conflict between the players? Between the players is where it becomes unacceptable.
I think in a lot of cases, what you see is people that don't know how to solve their problems without violence. And if you have somebody who's going to be playing a pacifist, they have to be smart. They have to sort of lead. I'll play a pacifist from time to time, but I'll play like an investigator or a face. And if you're going to do that, you're definitely going to need somebody to be muscle there with you. And if you're going to play a pacifist character, any conflict revolves around either getting around it or knowing what the other side wants so that you can sort of lure them out of their position of power.
Well, to use Chris's example, right? So you have a monk and kung fu master monk, and he's a pacifist.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That doesn't mean he doesn't trip every orc as they come in him. Trip him, take a step back, trip him, take a step back. And next thing you know, there's a pile of orcs laying at his feet that he didn't strike.
But I think the character that Chris was talking about isn't like a Buddhist monk. It's more the Mahatma Gandhi, the monk on the mount that's the fount of knowledge, who is then going to admonish the other characters constantly.
Right.
We can't get into a fight with them. It's not that we can't hurt them. It's we literally can't get into a fight with them.
Right. Yeah. You shouldn't be fighting them. We can't be fighting these people. That's just not right. That's not how things are done. And it's just like you're just like.
Do you think that's what people see when they see pacifists on a character sheet?
They don't understand
how
how
raise a
pacifist
finger
works.
to fight anything.
Yes, I think that's how people see it. I think that's part of the reason why, like I said before, when we had that on that character sheet, no one would play it. But as soon as we took it off, everybody's like, "Oh, I'm all over that." You know, that character looks really, really cool. You know, he was this big, strong, escaped slave who had been, beaten and tortured. And that's why he had a pacifism. And, and that was part of the backstory that we put on the sheet. But it's still, even though that was there saying, hey, this is why he's a pacifist. And it was a minor even.
Right.
Just, it scared people away. And I just think that people, one, don't want to play it, or I know we always say that there's no wrong way to have fun, but people just sometimes I don't think play it correctly.
Well, I do want to point out there's a difference between a one-shot where the character is a pre-gen, especially a one-shot at a convention or a setting where you're not going to get together with those same players a lot. Those situations, I think pacifism is seen as a roadblock to the style of play that most people expect in that one-shot environment. With that said, I think there's also the secondary consideration of it takes a lot of creative chops to play the pacifist in a non-pacifist game. If it's a gritty, violent game, it takes a bit of role-play chops to figure out how to pepper in stuff to have that pacifism hindrance come up enough that you get the bennies. Because here's the other thing to remember. Pacifist, even if you take major pacifist, doesn't mean your character can't do anything. You can slaughter wholesale with the major pacifist hindrance, and no one is going to take your dice away, slap your hand, or drive you from the table. You're just not going to get any bennies for that hindrance you took. That's the thing you have to remember.
Because you're not a pacifist.
Yeah. If you're not bringing that to the table through role play, then you're not going to get any bennies for it. But at the same time, Art Fernandez talks about this a little bit in chat. He says if a player can think out of the box, they can use other tricks to distract the enemy while berating the players for beating up the bad guys. And the interesting thing is, if you're a good enough role player, you can do both as the same action. The way I'm berating you is actually a smart trick that I'm using against your opponent. In roleplay, I really do mean for this to be me berating you. But in dice play, this is I'm doing something that draws their attention away from you. And it absolutely works, but you have to have the creative chops and the Savage Worlds chops to realize, hey, I can just trap my taunt as being me talking to the big fighter about how it's not a fair fight for him to beat up on the scrawny little orc who doesn't know any better and is too primitive to understand. That's totally a taunt against the orc, but I've just said it to the big fighter as a beration of his taking advantage of his weak opponent.
Right. Look at him. He's all sickly. His biceps aren't even as big as his thighs. Where's the challenge? Where's the victory? That kind of
One of the best ones is when you've got like stupid opponents, like say you've got a whole bunch of like kobolds or whatever, and you run out, arms up in the middle, and start screaming, "Help! Help! The wizard turned me into a human."
Yeah, there's absolutely different ways around it. I think back to what Chris was saying with his experience. I think that player characters shy away, or I think players shy away from the pacifist because they don't see the fun in it.
Yeah,
Like,
I was about to say they don't think you're going to have fun.
I'm not going to have fun if I can't kill and fight. You can fight. You just can't harm anybody. You can absolutely have fun with the pacifist. So let's kind of delve a little bit into Dave Martell's question here. I want to get this because Dave threw it up here. So question from the GM's perspective. If you want to deter violent solutions, in quotes, in your game, how should you go about it? I'm going to say this. If you want to deter violent solutions, you make them not work.
That's a good way to start.
I mean, that's blunt, but it's to the point.
You make them not profitable. You make having nothing in it. So just as an example, we're playing a medieval fantasy game. You roll into a high court. There's guys walking around with broadswords and armor everywhere. Their only goal in life is to fall in battle. But there's suicide. It's suicide by cop, where they're running at you like, kill me, kill me. And everybody wants you to kill them because that's how they get to heaven, is to fall at the feet.
I think there's another way to go about it, and that is just simply enforce consequences. If you slaughter that enemy, their friends and family come after you. Their boss sends more goons. There's the law to consider in certain settings or in certain environments within even the same. You might be playing in a traditional Western fantasy game, and the orc you kill in the dungeon is one thing, but the orc you kill in the back alley of the big city is completely different because he's a citizen of the city and protected by the laws therein, even if he's an orc. So you can absolutely bring consequences to bear. I think the other aspect of that is bring a mechanical consequence to bear. I can't even begin to express how quickly I watched players completely change the way they looked at a combat in Dead End, where all of a sudden you can't soak those wounds. A single paper cuts level attack. You take one wound, you're making an incapacitation check against that. The gritty damage from Realms of Cthulhu is so vicious, no one even considers combat as a primary solution. It becomes the last resort, the way you might want it to be in certain games. Now, it's a drastic measure, but if you bring mechanical consequences to combat, there's a lot of incentive not to let your character get hurt.
I would say, too, you can make it part of the story. They come into an area where they commit violence and something minuscule. They punch somebody, or better yet, they accidentally brush up against somebody and shove somebody in a bar. And the person goes, "You bastard, you just assaulted me." What are you talking about? "Oh, sorry, buddy, I didn't see you there." "No, he assaulted me." Next thing you know, you're standing in front of a judge. Next thing you know, you've got shot collars on, and they tell you have an aggressive thought or do something. and make it part of the game of getting out of that city, escaping that shot caller thing. I mean, there's things you can do. I don't think you want to necessarily eliminate combat as a conflict resolution. It's there. It should be a conflict resolution. I don't know that. Here's the thing. I think there's maybe a faulty syllogism in the question. Why do you want to detour a violent solution? Do you want to detour a violent solution?
I think what he's trying to say is he wants them to think of other options first. Like the idea of going straight into combat. Maybe if we could, how do you get them to think about doing things before fighting?
Right. He's trying to get out of, I think, the new cliche, the murder hoboism.
Yeah.
Where your first instinct is kill it, take it, stuff, and move on.
I would say this: do the Highlander bit. If anybody's watched the very first Highlander movie, the fact that he rises from the dead, nobody will fight him on the battlefield.
Right.
He goes back out to battle, and he goes up against them. Oh, they run away from him. And nobody will engage him in combat because he's a badass. He has a reputation.
Well, outside of that, they're worried he might be a god.
Right.
I mean, there's that approach, and that's honestly a great approach. Is if you've got high level characters, no one wants to fight them. The average street thug sees Superman land in the middle of the street and just gives up because he knows he has no fucking chance against the Man of Steel. It's a well-known thing. Occasionally you'll get the guy who unloads the gun because he's got to see for himself. But I mean, other than that, they all just give up because they can't defeat him. But with that said, I think the other thing to think about here is use your narrative to show them the error of their ways. And I don't necessarily mean the big consequences I talked about a minute ago, but like they come across the bandits in the woods. And the bandits are highwaymen in the traditional Robin Hood style. They're hanging to the trees. They say, your money or your life. And the player characters choose to kill them. And then they find out that there's a note on one of them with a map back to camp. And when they go back to camp, it's the entire village is there waiting for the spoils from Robin Hood of the Woods because this guy has been the only thing letting them live. And now that's turned into a plot hook to drag your players into political intrigue with the master prince of the area because they've just killed the local hero. They didn't know it, but their murder hoboism killed off one of the great figures of that world. You can twist the narrative behind the scenes like this because you're the GM. You're supposed to react to what they do, and this is an amazing way to go, oh, that's how you handled that. Well, here's this dramatic plot quest at your feet that you just stumbled into. That was a bear trap. I didn't know it was a bear trap until you stepped in it, but now it's absolutely a bear trap.
Well, you could also do the Clint Eastwood Unforgiven Western thing where the town, you turn in your weapons to the sheriff the second you step into town. And if you don't, the sheriff comes and finds you and not only takes your weapon, beats you bloody or to death in the process.
He has to make an example of you.
But that, I've seen that just, and then you get into that 30-minute discussion. Well, can I hide a weapon? Well, can I do this?
Yes.
Can I do that? Blah, 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 blah. And it just takes forever.
Absolutely, you can. You want to hide a weapon? Sure. Go ahead.
It all depends on your ability at the table, I think, to deal with those questions, and also the group. So that's the other thing. If you truly want to deter the violent solution being the primary solution at the game table, play with different players.
Yeah.
Play with players who don't want combat as the primary resolution style. Because here's the thing. And this goes back again to that conversation that I was having on the Facebook page about playstyle. You cannot force someone else to play differently. You can't legislate morality. You can't use rules and rules lawyership at the table to force someone to play this game differently. They have fun their way, and all you can do is suggest, hey, guys, why don't we try this? If they're against it, cut it off.
Right.
You know, that's just not going to be fun for at least one player at your table.
And I would say don't just limit it to violence if you're trying to tour things at the table. Let's say, for example, we're doing another Western, right? You roll into town, you roll into this town, and it's a Puritan town. This town was founded by God-fearing folk. And when you roll up, there are people on crucifixes or hanging from trees with signs around their necks that say adulterer.
Make sure you make a notice roll to see if you see them.
Yeah.
Right.
Adulterer, murderer, drunk, slovenly, greedy. Take all the things that most murder hobos are and put it out on display. You demonstrate that behavior here, you're getting hung up.
I kind of want to go in the opposite direction. I, like Dave said about when you killed the local hero who's been helping all of like the peasants, then like the noble finds out and sends you an invitation, and he's just like, well, people like us understand the importance of enforcing order.
Yeah, it's
Think about it.
Exact same trope. You're just twisting the direction you're coming to players from it. And that again, this is where all of this really shows flex the narrative and creative muscle, whether you're the player trying to play the pacifist or you're the GM trying to run a more pacifist campaign. You can flex a lot of narrative creativity to really change how the game is played and lean heavily on, obviously, the mechanics that exist, but there's a lot of meat on the bone out there that people just kind of skip over for all intents and purposes because we're all lazy and kind of stuck in the habit we have formed over the years of playing these games of, oh, there's my XP, I need to kill it.
Right.
What do you guys think about in inhabiting your world with mostly pacifist NPCs?
I gotta say that would turn all of the players would turn into murder hobos really quick, because the first thing I think is that sort of, no, I'm against violence in all forms, voice and pattern of speech. And I feel like after like the first hour of, no, I don't think we should fight the other kingdom, like the party will just kill everyone.
That's not what I'm talking about. Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying, okay, so the barkeep you meet is nervous.
Mm-hmm.
Nervous pacifist. He goes, listen, guys, please, no fights in here.
Yeah.
Please.
4 heavily armed adventurers just walked in his tavern. He really is nervous that you guys are going to destroy the place and he can't afford to rebuild.
Right.
And
right. I'm talking about pacifism, not as a ideology, but as a behavior, part of personality.
Oh, I mean, that's just
all of my modern games are. If you're playing in anything near a modern setting in one of my games, people live in a civilized society, and therefore they don't turn to violence. Even the blustery guy down the road who talks about kicking your ass, as soon as you punch him one time, he's laying on the ground going, "Hey man, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you." Like, you can absolutely hit your players with real people reactions to violence.
Right.
90% of the people you walk past on the street, I hate to tell you this, but if you hit them, they're going to look at you shocked and stunned, and they're going to be looking to the other people around them as witnesses for the civil case. I mean,
yeah,
we live in a society built on this idea, so it is absolutely appropriate when you're playing in a situation where the characters are in that kind of an environment. That's the way you should be role-playing the NPCs to them. These are not going to be, horrific, bloody, thirsty, peasants waiting to, chop up the latest adventure. No, they're litigious. They want to go before the king and have you pay for the fence you knocked down and the damage you did and the 3 weeks that they can't work in the field and Bessie's going to die because they can't milk her right, and then you're going to be working the farm for 3 weeks because the king is going to say, well, you need to go to this farm and handle all of the chores that he can't do because you injured him.
That, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Is you're inhabiting your play world with mostly pacifist characters,
Well,
litigious characters.
I think really, if you think about it, most NPCs, 90% of them probably should be.
Yeah.
And again, it all depends on the society we're talking about.
Sure.
If you're in some settings, some societies, that's absolutely not true. But in a good number of game settings that are out there, whether we're talking ETU or we're talking Rippers or Deadlands even. I mean, honestly, stop and think about it. The average person living in the Old West just doesn't want to die.
Right.
They depend on the local sheriff and the Texas Rangers to prevent their death. They're going to be looking to them as soon as you show up in town with all your shiny guns and weird science devices.
Right.
I feel like you punch the guy and then he takes a step back and rubs the blood off his nose and he looks at you like, what are you doing? Has anyone ever taught you about brinksmanship?
Well, Dave, tell me if I'm hearing this from you, if I'm remembering this from a story you've told. Something about a mural in a bar and gold pieces and Chiron, a death figure. Does this sound like... Maybe this is something I did not hear from you.
Okay. So
are you making up shit, Jared?
No, this is a great thing. We're talking about like pacifism as a spotlight in a game, as part of a main story arc where
Matt Colville, one of the great authors out there, he's worked for a couple different video game companies, and he runs an entire YouTube channel just about how to be a better GM in D&D specifically. But really what he's giving are master GM techniques. They're not necessarily rules specific. But he tells this story about a group of players who walk into this bar and immediately everyone's nervous because they're there. And as the things go on, a guy walks in, kind of threatens the bartender. The players step in to protect the bartender. The bartender's like, please, no. Don't do it. Don't hurt him. The players run the guy through because he's being an asshole to the bartender, and bam! All of a sudden, the local guardsmen pop into existence next to them through teleportation. But two of the guardsmen are infected with demonic power and have horns. And they'd walk right in, pick the body up, carry it out, throw it on a cart, and they hand the barkeeper these magically imbued gold coins and a marker of a demonic god and walk out. And the bartender just turns to the players and goes, how could you? I told you not to hurt anyone. I told you. How many times do I have to tell you? Now I have to be a servant of his for another year. And turns and strides away. Because the players stepped in to do this heroic thing and save the bartender, but really what they just did is enslaved him to the dark master of the area, who teleports his left-hand man in immediately anytime someone dies to violence and pays the establishment for doing it, but the gold is cursed so that he is automatically alerted when someone there dies. And it becomes a dark, twisted storyline. And Matt talks about how this immediately had this impact on the player characters because he just went GM fiat on them. He didn't give them an opportunity to react to this demonic troop walking in and doing this, that it was their aura and power held the players at bay or what have you. But you can just lay that on your players as a description of the reaction of the world to their actions. And that's a massive hurdle to now get over. And that might be the big bad of your entire campaign is the Dark Lord who leads all of this. And you've just peppered in. Now they have to worry about this everywhere they go.
And it sticks in their heads of, well, wait, We can't just run people through indiscriminately. We need to stop and think about what we're about to do. So to me, that's another, how do you deter it? You make it part of the story.
Right.
In a unique way that the players aren't anticipating. Play on the trope.
I've been considering this. All right, so there are some things that are sort of related, but sort of not related. Take, for instance, if you get in the horror companion Sanity or the sci-fi companion, you get Strain. What if killing or committing acts of violence brings you closer to this point where you just lose all of your humanity? I mean, in a game, you have to roll a sanity check every time you kill someone in a way that it could have been avoided.
I mean, if you want to play World of Darkness.
Right.
I don't think you can't really enforce humanity. You can incentivize it.
Right.
You can incentivize it, absolutely. I think if you wanted to do another quick thing, if it's another common Western, fantasy trope, you're responsible for the people you kill, and their ghosts haunt you. That's just the way the world works.
Their ghosts haunt you. Their kids show up. Mom and the kids show up wanting to know where their monthly stipend is because you killed dad.
Like the orc that you slayed that is regular human size, his widow shows up and she's size +4 and demands that you now marry her as part of orc culture.
Right, yeah. Because you slayed her husband.
Right.
So you're obviously the better man.
Now you have to marry the wife, or you can go the other direction. You slayed the opponent, and then the sergeant at arms shows up and goes, "Okay, well, you owe the king 750 gold pieces. That was his ransom price that we have to pay back because he's been killed instead of taken hostage like he was supposed to be."
Right. Or you could do the American Werewolf in London trope, right? Oh, you're a werewolf. It's great, but everybody you kill comes back as a ghoul and haunts you.
Mm-hmm. Can I have a piece of toast? Favorite part of that movie.
Just do us a favor, man. Kill yourself. This can't keep going on.
Right. Then he's got to haunt himself forever.
Yeah. So, I mean, and let's talk about that in Savage Worlds terms, right? So, whenever you kill somebody, the minute you take a violent act, that person shows up to remind you, and you're making a fear check. As their the person you slew just shows up. Dude, remember what happened last time you did this?
So Art Fernandez actually asked a question just now that ties into this perfectly, because I think it's all one great discussion. He says, how do you suggest using bennies to promote the pacifist hindrance? And the very first example is what you guys are talking about right now. Let the player come up with what's the baggage their character carries every time someone is killed in their presence. Whether it's they killed or someone else kills, let them turn to the player and go, and how do you react to this happening? And if they give you a good role play, that's an immediate Benny. And it sets the tone right there that player should react every time a character dies in their presence.
Yep.
That you set the tone, and then you're going to reward that with bennies.
I go sit in the corner and I rock back and forth and cry.
So you can do a lot with this to set a tone with that Benny gift. And again, while you can't punish a player for not playing their hindrance within core rules, you might have your own house rule. You absolutely can turn to a player and challenge a hindrance and say, this just happened. How do you react?
And I think you should do that. I think that's good GMing, because you're bringing that character's hindrances, which they want to play, into the game, and you're bringing it to the forefront. And you can even do that maybe if it's a hindrance that they took because they just wanted the points. And then you can sneak away in there to bring that hindrance out and almost, I hate to say it, but force them to play that hindrance. And if it is the pacifist, and you haven't really seen them playing that. What you just said, Dave, right there is a brilliant idea and a brilliant way to bring that pacifism out.
Well, and it's not just for the player who's reluctant to role play it, but it's also maybe for the player who doesn't know how to role play it.
Right.
They don't know when their character should role play pacifism. And as a GM, I have always felt that as a GM, it is your job not just to run the game for your players, but to kind of teach them how to game, how to role play, how to do these things, and challenge them so that they're constantly maturing. I don't care if I have a first-time gamer in my group or if Jared is the one in my group. I will occasionally challenge either a hindrance, an edge, something they have, or an action they say that they're going to take on the basis of, is that really what your character would do in this situation? And that can be anything from, are you really going to dive headlong out of the second-story window? To, okay, so explain to me why your character, as a pacifist, also took martial artist. Oh, well, he was a former boxer and he killed somebody in the ring. Great thing. Now we're in the bar fight. How do you feel about the fact everyone around you is punching people?
Yep. Well, and here's the thing too. It's not just with pacifism. It works with any hindrance. So let's say you're outnumbered, outgunned. All your weapons been stripped from you, and you're in the process of surrendering to Cortez and his gang of desperados. And then as a GM, I'm looking at the sheet and I'm going, hey, this character's got arrogant. And overconfident. Holy shit. Hey, Bob. Yeah? I know your character's arrogant and overconfident. I'm sure you still got a piece stuck away in your boot. Like with one shot. Yeah? I think maybe Bob might pull that trigger and shoot Cortez in the head. Just to prove he can. And if he does that, I'll give you 2 of my GM bennies. That means I have 2 less bennies to soak wounds or reroll for the bad guys. What do you say? Now, everybody standing next to him in that party is going to go, no, don't do it.
Yeah, please don't do that.
And if Bob goes, oh, yeah, fuck it, why not? And you've just made the story more interesting. You didn't force anything on anybody, but you really did Benny bait him. You did Benny bait him.
But isn't that what we want? More interesting stories.
I think so, and I don't think it's the GM being a dick, going, hey, you're in the middle of the fight. This guy's got heroic in the middle of the fight. Hey, a baby carriage rolls out in the middle of the street, and there's a woman screaming, "My baby!" and there's gunshots going off everywhere.
So I do want to say,
how do you feel about that?
This technique is all about delivery. If you can deliver it in a manner where your player's initial reaction isn't, oh, that's a dick move, go for it with gusto. If you can't, slowly feed this out a campaign until you learn how to do it properly.
Slowly back away.
Because while this is probably one of the best techniques, it's also not exactly the easiest technique.
Right.
It's a little heavy-handed.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little heavy-handed. But it depends also, too, on how you play it for the GM side of that screen, where, the bad guys know you're heroes. It's a baby doll in the carriage going, wah, and the woman that's going, my baby, is one of the shooter's main squeeze. And it's all set up.
Well, and I think it's all also can be in how often you roll that out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, like anything else, don't beat them over the head with it repeatedly. But it's a lot of it is in the way you use it. So one of the other things I wanted to touch on here is how much fun your players will suddenly find themselves having when this happens. And this I want to throw directly to Chris, because, I mean, we've all heard the legendary story, but it bears repeating that you can have an entire session that has really no combat challenge to it whatsoever.
Right. Well, yeah, they had a dance-off.
Is that combat?
Oh, it was dance combat, my friend.
If you do it right.
It was dance combat. And then they had a martial arts contest on the front lawn at one point. I mean, there was no fighting in it, but there was a who could, it was kind of like who could do the motions better. I don't know what you call that. I'm not a martial arts guy.
Kata. It's a kata.
Sure, kata, yeah. And so we had all kinds of stuff like that going on, and really did not have a combat.
Give a point of reference for nobody who's heard the story before, just so they understand what we're talking about.
That was my first ETU game in our ETU ongoing campaign, where we took the players. It's kind of like a living campaign. So we took the players from freshman up to senior. We're not done yet, and it was their freshman year. It was the very first running of the game, and I decided it was a Sunday afternoon. If you guys have been to cons, you know how sometimes Sunday afternoons can be. Everybody's just tired and winding down, and so I took the players and said, "Hey, all right. So in my brain, what can I do to get them, to kind of meet one another?" And I said, "Well, I'll put them in like a 10-minute frat party where they all go and they meet each other." And I've said it before, they never got to the adventure. 3.5 hours later, they were still at the frat party. Best session I've ever run at a convention.
Right, and the thing that
and they all come back. They all come back. They all love coming back to play my Sunday afternoon game.
Well, the trick to that is Chris rolling with the punches, going, okay, well, they don't want combat. Okay, so we're not going to make this. I had combat planned. I had a plot. Fuck it. This is what they want to do. Roll with it.
Yeah, the last 10 minutes of the game, I'm like, all right, this is what was supposed to happen. So when you get to part 2 and all this shit happens, you kind of know what happened in part 1, and they were fine with that.
Well, there's an interesting thing to be said. Some settings like ETU lend themselves to kind of non-combat resolution. If you look, a fair bit of what exists out there for ETU content can be handled with the players never lifting a hand in combat.
And they're not really supposed to. I mean, they're in college. They're students. Their starting characters have a cap on what they can have in the beginning. So that de-incentivizes or penalizes the idea of actually going out, because you know where you're capped at, but you don't know where your opponents are capped at.
I'm gonna say this too, as far as a little step backward into deterring violence in your campaign, or promoting non-combat resolutions. Start asking for unskilled persuasion checks from characters who don't have them. Yeah. Make it a point to go, hey, you're trying to convince somebody of something. I'm gonna need a persuasion check, dude. I don't have persuasion. That's fine. D4 -2. Make it unskilled. And then the character who's invested in, I want to be the face guy, I don't want to be the combat monkey, can still play more of a pacifist style character without feeling like they wasted their points because you never call for a persuasion roll.
Yeah.
And make sure you're utilizing all the skills in the game. There's a whole plethora of times you can challenge a knowledge roll, streetwise, persuasion. There's a lot of skills out there that aren't just notice, fighting, shooting, and throwing.
Right. Have the town's guard show up in the middle of a bar fight and go, all right, what's all this then? And let the player characters talk their way out of it. Convince the constable that guy over there threw the first punch. I was just defending myself. All right. Give me a persuasion roll at a +2, because he doesn't want to cart anybody to jail tonight. The more that he has to. Give me, lie to me. Tell me a good lie. All right. Now I'm gonna give me a persuasion check to see if I buy that lie. And don't just hoist it on your face character. Hoist it on the combat monkey.
At the beginning of the month, his quota just reset. He doesn't need to take anyone to jail tonight. Schmooze your way out of it.
Right. Or you know what? I'll be willing to let this go. I don't know. Money's tight at the end of the month. Put characters in front of them that want to take a bribe instead of draw a sword. I mean,
yeah, if you want to,
I might be persuaded to let this go.
Right.
If you want to deter combat, there's a lot of ways to go about it, including just having them do the cough, cough, bribe me, cough, cough, kind of an intro, because that right there, your players aren't expected to come up with it. You've told them what they can do to get out of this without a combat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else left in the chat we want to talk about real quick?
Well, there was a question early on from Dan Cook that we never touched on. He says, I know it's not the topic, but would you guys ever not reward a bonus to a social conflict roll for someone trying to role play, even if they really suck? And my answer to that is no, never. And here's what I mean. That doesn't necessarily mean you're always going to get a bonus for your role play. But if your role play sucks, you might get a penalty. You might get a bonus. It doesn't matter whether your character's any good at it, because you still have to make the dice roll. If I give you a bonus that maybe gets rid of the -2 on your unskilled check, I don't care. You're still making a D4 check trying to achieve something. So I don't have to worry about your character sucks, and as a GM, I have to enforce that. No. If you role play something really well, you get a +2, and maybe it cancels the penalty you already started with.
And it says they're trying. Hey, if you're trying, I'm not the most eloquent guy, but if I'm trying, and because I'm not, Chris is not saying the exact right words and things like that, and the GM says, oh, well, I can't give you a bonus, so fuck you. I'm trying.
Well, and here's the thing. The player might want to fail. If they've built a character that has no skill in that regard, they may want to fail. And so tell them, hey, give me a roleplay that's worth a penalty. Roleplay an obvious lie, and I'll give you the penalty that goes with it. Give the player some coaching as a GM to lead them where you want them to go or where they want the scene to go. Give them some ideas because, you got a D6 in persuasion, but you really don't want this to succeed. Fine. Tell him a lie. Insult him by calling him this name that's esoteric, but is something that really means something to his race or species or class in that particular game world. You can come up with a lot of interesting tweaks and things you can do with that roleplay bonus, because bonus does not always mean it's a positive modifier.
I would say this. I'm never going to punish a player for attempting to roleplay. And I'm going to say this right now. Your role play is not this pigeonholed, eloquent, I'm doing it with an accent and I'm a thespian. That is not what role play means. Role play can mean describe what your character is doing in the third person. I'm fine with that. You can't. Okay, so you're not coming up with the words on the spot to improv and act this out. Fine. What's your character's intent? What is his motivation? What are your player character's thoughts on how you're trying to pull this off? If I got a player at the table going, I want to do some really slick Axl Rose or Axl F Foley kind of thing, where I trick him with a banana, use some kind of prop to make it work. Okay, what are your thoughts on it? How do you sell that? They could explain to me what it is they're trying to accomplish, and to me, that's role play. Yeah, and I'm not going to punish them for not role play.
Yeah.
And when I say there can be some negative modifiers for that bonus, that's only if they role play something that, they call his mom a whore. You're getting a -2.
Yeah, bad form, dude.
If they talk in the wrong accent, no, they don't get a -2 for sucking at the role play. You can give them penalties based on their character sucking, but never for the player sucking. Right. Always reward that. And here's the thing I would do in that situation. If I have to give a player a penalty because of the way they role-played their character, oftentimes that penalty comes with a Benny, because I want them to know that as a player they did nothing wrong, and in fact I want them to continue to do that sort of thing. I'm showing them that with the Benny. The penalty is because, well, within the story, you just called him an Ekon, which his species considers the highest insult because they're Yokon, and Ekon are their natural enemies, who they've been blamed for every horrific thing they ever did because they happen to look the same.
Yeah, you just made a social faux pas. That's why you're getting the penalty. I'm going to say this too. At my table, if you're ever playing at my table and we're playing a Savage Saturday Night, we're playing a one-shot, I'm going to tell you right up front, there's no such thing as a bad accent. Do not withhold giving us an accent in character roleplay because you think it's going to be horrible. I don't care if you start off with a Scottish Brill and end up Jamaican and then end up in an English Aussie accent all in one sentence. I don't give a fuck. It's the attempt that matters.
Whoa. Great Dutch accent.
I'll share that. So playing in one of Dave's pirate games, one of the languages my character took was Dutch. And they were like, okay, you're dressed as a Dutch army officer. What do you say to the guy at the front gate? And I'm like, oh, shit. I don't even know what a Dutch accent sounds like to even start. I went, okay, you ready? Here's my Dutch accent. I am Keanu Reeves. And just, I am an FBI agent. Whoa. I'm speaking Dutch. That's my character hand up for I'm role-playing a Dutch accent. And why not? Give the player a benefit for going, you know what? Good job. You're making somebody laugh at the table. You're trying to role play, and you're admitting, hey, I don't have the chops to pull off a Dutch accent, but I still want to do the accent. I still want to do the role play.
It's so weird.
Mm-hmm. But you're wearing lederhosen. Yeah, they're Swedish.
And just remember, anytime your character is talking to a Savage Worlds fan and they demand the head of Clint Black, it's an automatic -4.
Yeah. It's bad form. Just bad form. All right. On that, we'll leave it for this week. Until next time, this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning for Dustin, Dave, and Chris saying keep rolling and stay savage.